speaker this morning is Dr. Rob Burry. Rob has worked for Manitoba Agriculture as a dairy cattle specialist since 2004. He was previously employed with the Scottish Agricultural College doing research and extension for the UK dairy sector, and from 1999 to 2004 he was a research associate in the Animal Science Department at the University of Manitoba. Today Rob will be giving us an update on dairy cow lameness, and I'm going to hand it over to Rob.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, we're ready to go? Okay, thanks for the opportunity to do this. I just want to give a bit more on my background because in Scotland we did a lot of sort of extension work looking at sort of cow lameness. So one of my duties was to go out and sort of collect information. So we had various cohorts of cows from heifers to trace them all the way through to fourth lactation. There's a shot there of a nice Ayrshire cow. There's not that many Ayrshire cows left in Scotland, unfortunately, but they're pretty good animals to work for, but they don't get any less lame than Holsteins or Jerseys, sort of thing. Everything has the same problem. Anyhow, so in terms of sort of what's the impact of lameness right now on a world scale, worldwide incidence, because we have quite a few cows at pasture, tends to be a bit lower than we see in more intensive situations. Incidence in Canada is reported around about 35%, the US 46%, UK 62%. With the recent ProAction pilot, we saw levels of sort of lameness around about the 30% level. It's the fourth main reason for culling herds in Manitoba, and it accounts for 10% of kills. But we'll go into, it actually impacts the three reasons for culling as well. And it's probably the third most important cattle health problem worldwide following reproduction. So the direct costs of, lameness issues, one, milk production. A lame cow is in pain. She doesn't walk very easily to the feed face, and she tends to slug feed, and that affects production. The other thing is if she's not getting adequate nutrition, she loses body condition. A lot of body condition loss and early lactation will add up into sort of a delayed ovulation time. They're harder to get into calf, and that adds to the culling costs and replacement costs as well. So the direct treatment costs of lameness, like the hoof trimmer, preventative treatment like foot baths, treating with any antibiotics sort of thing, are basically minor compared to your milk production losses and your replacement reproductive losses. So this is a foot. This is probably what looks like a heifer's foot before she calves for the first time. And what you sort of notice there is how nice and integral that hoof horn is. It's not discolored. It's all sort of hemorrhaged and so on. But following that, a year later, following calving, we see feet that look a bit more like this. The hoof horn tends to be a bit yellower. The white line tends to be a bit thicker. There's a lot of hemorrhage being incorporated with the hoof horn itself, which shows there's a bit of malformation of the hoof horn below that area. In terms of differences between heifers and older cows, heifers tend to be a bit more resilient to lameness problems in terms of hoof horn problems. This graph shows sort of decreasing yield from a lameness upset and the weeks after initial onset. And heifers tend to resolve their issues a lot faster. Older cows tend to have problems for longer, if you like. But it also depends on the type of lameness as well. If we compare sole ulcers with things like digital dermatitis, so sole ulcers there in red and digital dermatitis in yellow, and we look at the yield losses from the initial time when the animal became lame as a locomotion score of 3. Well, digital dermatitis tends to be acutely painful. It's painful on the initial onset, and it tends to resolve in terms of pain. So you see animals recovering yield fairly rapidly from when they get digital dermatitis the first time. Sole ulcer, on the other hand, because it takes time to resolve, and there's always a risk of that ulcer becoming infectious as it progresses, it tends to around. The effects of a soil also tend to stick around for a lot longer, especially if the animal's not blocked or seen to by a foot trimmer. So in terms of, what are the risk factors associated with dairy cow lameness? Well, they're multiple, and they all tend to be multifactorial. They all tend to share sort of fairly good linkages in terms of where we are. Anything from your housing, the amount of infectious risk in the environment, genetics play a part, nutrition plays a very large part, and also we're getting more of a handle on the animal's behavior and how it impacts the degree and the risk of lameness in today's herds. So, lameness has been sort of documented for so long in intensive situations. So why aren't we getting on top of the situation in terms of research? But one of the things, it's very costly to do any sort of dairy cow studies. And because lameness tends to be multifactorial, there's a lot of confounding factors there that are very difficult to control for. You need a very large research budget to sort of have an overriding sort of factorial experiment, if you like. So most of the studies tend to be observational studies than actually direct experimentation. And these observational studies, they're very useful, but they don't explain the full story. So, historically, our view of nutritional sort of influences on lameness tend to center around ruminal upsets. Like a cow will get some rapidly fermentable feed, and that will increase the rumen acidity. We'll get a bacterial die-off for certain types of bacteria, which then release toxins. These toxins then cross or even damage the rumen wall and get into the bloodstream. And as these toxins flow around the bloodstream, they tend to cause restriction in blood vessels, especially in extremities, in like capillaries. And in the capillaries, in the hoof-forming tissue called the corium. Now, this affects how well the corium gets nutrients, and you might even see a stoppage of hoof horn formation from the corium. So these corium cells die, they get incorporated in the hoof horn, and the hoof horn they produce is less integral. So you see sort of damage, not only from the tissues of the corium, but also from the hoof horn itself being pretty crappily produced at that time. But thinking about how nutrition actually impacts this tissue, it basically affects how well those cells that produce hoof horn are taking up nutrients and how well they are supplied with nutrients. So the acute sort of acidosis that will affect blood supply also will impact how well they get nutrients, but also how that hoof is moving. As the animal walks on cement, for instance, does it get trauma, will also affect how well the blood supply goes into the corium. So this tissue we know is really sensitive to changes in nutrient supply and type of nutrients. And as I said before, the nutrient supply can either be affected by restriction of blood supply or by direct variation in the dietary supply of nutrients to the tissue. And of course, one of the major factors is acidosis, and especially we see subacute ruminal acidosis in today's herds. So the tissue we're talking about, it surrounds the bone at the very toe of the hoof, and it's called the corium. So in this slide here, you see the red tissue. That's sort of living cells well supplied with blood, and these cells are taking up the nutrients supplied by the diet. And they're basically primarily just making one type of protein called keratin. Now this keratin surrounds the cell, and as the cell slowly grows away from this vascular area, it becomes harder and starts to cross-join with other cells. And eventually, the further away it moves from the nutrient source, it dies. And then it becomes hoof horn. It's very sort of a stratified, like a matrix-like structure. So that's how hoof horn forms in the cow's foot. So because keratin is a protein, it's really influenced by the type of protein that's supplied to the corium layer. Now, there are two amino acids that are really important for keratin production. One's methionine and the other is cysteine. And these two amino acids have a sulfur complex on them. And the sulfur is what cross-bonds the keratin fibers. Now, the ratio of these amino acids is strongly associated with how resilient and how strong the hoof horn actually is. So if you have higher amounts of cysteine, you get more cross-bonding of those keratin fibers. So if you have higher amounts of cysteine in the hoof horn, you tend to have harder, more resilient hoofs. So sort of give an idea of the ratio. So methionine and cysteine ratios there. If we look at their ratios in the wall horn, which is the hardest horn that the foot can produce, and that's the horn that bears most of the weight of a cow when she's moving around. There's about a 6 to just below 1 ratio of cysteine to methionine. There's a lot of cysteine in that hoof horn. If you look at a softer type of horn, so the sole horn, which tends to be the one that cushions the blow of the foot as it lands on the surface, we see less cysteine and a slightly higher amount of methionine there. But if we look at what's supplied to the cow, if we look at something called microbial protein, so this is the protein that comes out of the rumen that the cow directly digests. The microbes break down roughly 70% of all the protein that you sort of provide in the ration, and then they reconstitute them into microbial protein. So we look at the microbial, this is about 70% of the protein that the cow is actually going to get. The amount of cysteine compared to methionine is a lot lower. There's almost sort of 2.5 times the amount of methionine there as to cysteine. And if we look at sort of even if we give some bypass protein, either distillers or soybean meal or canola meal, the ratio is about 1 to 1. We're not biasing the animal to get higher amounts of cysteine, which he actually needs to produce good quality hoof horn. Following on, I mean, the second most important thing that you should maybe be aware of is the influence of vitamin and minerals on hoof horn production. So we know most diets, especially if you have an alfalfa-based diet, we're not going to be deficient in calcium. Calcium is very important for producing matrix. But levels of copper and zinc tend to be of more concern. The reason for zinc being so important is zinc forms a complex where some of these enzymes play a really big role in how hoof horn forms. So they're involved with how well that those protein structures are produced, how much keratin is produced. It's also responsible for how quickly the cells that get keratinized and produce hoof horn go from the blood supply corium layer into the dead cells for hoof horn. And they also control the regulatory process, like the rate of hoof horn production. Now, there's a lot of credible studies out there using like complex zinc supplements, which improve the level of metalloenzymes in the cow and also then improve hoof horn production. I don't want to name specific companies, but one of them has zinc in its name. And they have a lot of research that backs up their claim. So they're a very good dietary additive to put in a dairy cow ration.
Sorry to interrupt you, Bob.
Sorry.
Yeah. We're having a little bit of difficulty hearing you. You're cutting in and out a little bit.
Okay.
You want to try just talking a little bit slower and maybe not moving around if you're moving around in front of your computer.
Okay.
If it gets better.
Okay, no problem. Is that okay? I have no idea. All I can see is the microphone is picking up everything I say.
Yeah, that's better now. You know what? It's not bad. Just sometimes we lose you at the end of a sentence, maybe the last. So.
Okay. So going on, like biotin. Lots of feed companies can add this to your bought-in ration or even supply a mineral or vitamin that's actually high in biotin. And the reason for biotin being really important, it helps to produce a product that helps glue these dying cells together as they become hoof horn. And it also makes the hoof horn more resilient. It improves its elasticity, which makes it a lot more resilient to being, worn against smudge. So you don't need high levels of biotin, roughly about 20 milligrams a day, and that's been shown to reduce the risk of white line disease by up to 40%. The other benefit of biotin, it's actually a very good supplement for making skin less prone to damage. So biotin also helps control digital dermatitis, for instance. It also helps for things like skin lesions, especially on feet. So biotin's a good thing to add to your ration as a whole anyway. As I mentioned before, the influence of acidosis on the cow, we don't typically right now talk about like acute acidosis. We mostly go for this thing called SARA, which is subacute ruminal acidosis. And it means at certain points during the day, the dairy cow's rumen dropping to 5.2 to 5.6 for relatively short periods, up to like 45 minutes. Perhaps those cows are the first one to the feed bank on provision of fresh feed, and they're able to sort through and get a larger amount of concentrate, for instance. So what this actually does, it causes measurable damage to the rumen wall, and it also kills some of the bacteria, which then release the toxin that enters the bloodstream. So, I mean, influences on SARA, which would then influence the risk of poor hoof horn development. It's pretty heavily dependent on physically effective fiber. So it's a good idea for anyone feeding a TMR to do regular checks with shaker boxes, and just to see if you are reaching desired levels of physical fiber in the ration, a physically effective NDF in the ration. There's also some behavioral influences on how the animal feeds at the feed face. So because this influences how much food an animal gets in one go, for instance, can influence the risk of SARA. So things like displacements at the feed bank, which interrupts feed, which causes the lower ranking animals to stay away until the feed bank is clear. They come there and they feed for longer, but they have fewer feeding periods, for instance. That influences SARA. The amount of feed area access, how much space you physically have for each cow will influence it. And also rumination time. And in terms of rumination time, stall design also comes into this. An animal will only really ruminate if it's calm and it's in a secure environment. So most of the rumination time centers around stall. Most of the rumination occurs when an animal is lying or standing in that stall. So more comfortable stalls usually lead to longer rumination time, which helps dissipate the risk of SARA. So in terms of what we're sort of talking about here, the red sort of highlighted tissue there, that's the corium. It produces the hoof wall itself. It produces the lamina, which attaches the hoof wall to the pedal bone. And it also produces the sole and the heel horn itself. Now, when you start to produce less integral hoof horn, whether it's nutritional or whether it's sort of physical damage, what tends to happen is that toe bone, the pedal bone, will start to sink down away from the hoof wall itself, and it will actually start to pinch the corium beneath it, the stuff that produces sole horn. And if it pinches it enough and interrupts the blood supply, you'll get either really, really poor hoof horn form there, which is worn away really quickly, or it'll stop hoof horn production entirely. So you'll end up with a sole ulcer in a really sort of typical spot, which is just after the heel on the sort of outer claw of the hind foot. And these things are a problem. They're very painful. They're prone to infection, and they take a long time to resolve in terms of damage for that animal. So I'd just like to mention a bit about, like, how these different types of lameness distributed in the cow. We see far more lameness associated with the hind feet than we do with the forefeet. About 20% of lameness occurs in the forefeet compared to 80% in the hind feet. And there's also a distribution within claws as well. In the hind feet, most of the problems occur in the outer claw. In the front feet, more of the problems occur in the inner claw. So if you actually look at the weight distribution of a cow, she has about sort of 55 to 60% of her weight are actually on the front feet, because the rumen is closer to the front feet, and the head and the neck also are sort of forward, so they place more weight compared to the hind feet. So why do hind feet have more issues? Well, it's down to the biomechanics of the hoof. If we look at where the maximal pressure occurs when an animal is walking, there's much more force placed through the hind feet. So that explains some of the variation in lameness distribution. So in terms of what your foot trimmer should be concentrating on, is actually transferring as much pressure on that hind foot by correcting the balance between the claws. You want, because you know there's going to be maximum pressure there, you want it to occur on a larger surface area. So some of the studies that have looked at sort of putting a force plate down and making cows walk over it in various ways have shown that areas where cows are more prone to getting like hot spots, high pressure spots. So if you look at this sort of picture here, then the one on the left side is a lateral claw, the outer hind claw. And you can see there's a hot spot just towards the sort of heel area there. And that's a point of contact where the animal is getting a lot of force. And that'll also influence how quickly the hoof horn will wear away there. But more importantly, it's going to transfer the force to the blood vessels underneath and maybe restrict supply, so the corium might not get adequate nutrition there. And you see the inner claw is not, the surface area of the inner claw that's getting any force put through it is a lot smaller. So this slide shows that the amount of times the maximal pressure is put through each claw. So if we look at the black bars there, which are for the forelimb, lateral means outer, medial means inner. We see more force going through the medial claws for the forelimb. This can be influenced by a number of things as well. You'll see a lot more force if cows are stretching to get feed, reaching through the feed bunk, for instance, and splaying their front legs. There'll be a lot more force placed on those claws there, which then leads to more problems. We look at the white bars there, that's for the hind limb. We see a lot more force put through the hind limb, and that's typically the sort of the outer hind claws tend to get more problems. So this slide shows there was a study done looking at the distribution of pressure and force before a foot was trimmed and after a foot was trimmed. So this is a hind leg here, same foot. So the lateral is the outer, the medial is the inner. And they looked at the force sort of pressure afterwards. But after corrective trimming, you can see there's a lot more surface area of the outer claw that's helping distribute the force. And on the inner claw, you see a change in color, because before the inner claw wasn't getting much force on the toe at all. It's blue, it's not getting a high force level there. And afterwards, the toe is taking a lot more support of the force as the cow walks. So if you look at the maximal force that we see through a foot pre-trimming and post-trimming, the black line bars are pre-trimming and the white is post-trimming. There's a major drop between the hind and the forelimbs after trimming. You get a major drop in the force, which then leads to less risk for underlying tissues in the foot that produce hoof horn. And also, if we look at the amount of surface contact area the feet have pre and post trimming, we get a major increase in the amount of contact area, which then helps distribute that force that goes through the foot, which is also going to reduce the risk of lameness. So black is pre-trimming, white is post-trimming. In both fore and hind limbs, you get an increase in surface area for transfer of force, just by balancing and how exposed, how flat those hooves are after trimming. So, I mean, a typical sort of cow that is lame, just to show you how she's actually distributing her weight when she is lame. When she's standing, she's trying to reduce the amount of weight on the hind feet, which are typically the ones that get lame. So she's arching her back and throwing the weight of the rumen as far forward as she can. So lame cows walking or standing will tend to have arched backs because they're trying to get the weight off the hind feet, and therefore if there's less weight on the hind feet when you're walking, there's less force going through them. So there's less pressure and less pain. Surfaces also play a part in how much force is transferred on the bottom of the foot here. Slats tend to have hot spots depending on how they're orientated when the cow is walking. So, but like more solid surfaces and grooves also help distribute the weight a lot more evenly. So you're not getting like pressure points on the bottom of the hoof there that will start to impact how well the hoof horn forms in those specific areas. I mean, one sort of major issue that like everyone is having issues on their dairy right now is digital dermatitis, hairy warts. It's a very difficult disease to deal with and control. It doesn't affect the hoof horn itself, but it does affect the skin surrounding the top of the hoof and in between the claws itself. It's very painful. It doesn't often swell up very much, so you may not see like a change in the skin area. Highly contagious, and it's mostly associated with wet environments and with manure that's to the skin itself. The bacteria that causes this is an anaerobe. It needs to be away from oxygen to grow well, or to grow optimally. And it tends to invade the skin itself. So what cows will actually try and do is to grow the damage or the infection away from an area. So in some like chronic cases, you'll see these things looking like sort of like big hairy masses. So someone described them as muppets. The other issue they do is you'll see growths that get in between the claws as well. And when the cow walks, she'll pinch these like skin growths, and it's extremely painful. So digital dermatitis, like once an animal has reached this stage, there's very little chance of cure, and this animal is also infectious for other animals in your herd. But I'd just like to finish a bit talking about cow comfort and stall design and animal behavior as it relates to sort of lameness risk. So, I mean, proper sizing of stalls and cow comfort. I mean, we've been focused on this for quite a long time. We focus on this primarily to keep the cows clean so we get better quality milk, but also it impacts lameness in a fairly direct way. So we try and design a stall that the cow can't necessarily stand in, so she's not going to soil it, and we'll get issues in terms of sort of either increased risk of mastitis or increased risk of bacterial counts in her milk. So by focusing on cow cleanliness, we might be ignoring the fact that we're actually trying to like design stalls that are better for cows in terms of lameness. So the neck rails that are restrictive, lower and closer to the rear of the stall, decrease the amount of time spent increase the amount of time spent standing on concrete, because cows don't like being in and out of them. So lying time is reduced, and also standing on cement then goes up. Both those things are a risk for lameness. So in extreme cases, I mean, this is a cow that will sort of adopt this sort of posture. She'll perch in the stalls, so there'll be increased pressure on the hind limbs there, because if a cow that does this with the front feet inside and the hind limbs out, the rumen starts to move backwards, and there's more weight placed on the hind feet, and therefore there's more pressure on the hind feet. So ideally, you'd like the cow to be able to stand with all 4 feet in the stall, but still not there's so much space that she can actually stand and defecate in the stall. So from a point of view of a cow, the stall is like a refuge from other animals in the herd. As I said before, they'll spend most of their time ruminating inside the stall because it's a nice, quiet, safe environment for them. And one of the other things to realize that stalls that are more comfortable will be occupied a lot more often, a lot more frequently, and for a lot longer. And these tend to be dirtier as well. So you'll be able to see in your herds the stalls that you're cleaning out a lot more often those are the primo stalls. Those are the stalls that the cows really like and really want to be in. The other thing to notice as well is that, if you have a stall setup that you're seeing no dirty stalls at all, that might be a bit of a cause of concern, because, that tells me that the stalls are not even big enough for the heifers. So, the heifers should be sort of slightly smaller than the stall itself, sort of thing, so they're getting the opportunity to lie more effectively. So in terms of a barn, which stalls are preferred? Well, animals tend to prefer stalls in the middle of a row, and they also tend to prefer stalls that are closer to the feed alley. So if we look at sort of a typical barn, the stalls on a 3-row barn here, like stalls on the back row in the middle, will be occupied 12% less compared to stalls that are in the front low row in the middle closest to the feed alley. The ones that are on the very peripherals are also occupied about 20% less. All this has sort of some impact with stocking density as well. So, what do cows typically do in a day? There's a lot of sort of hidden behavior that we don't actually see. So, she'll feed for around about 3 to 5 hours. She'll lie hopefully over 10 hours, 10 to 14 hours. 12 hours would be a good goal to aim for. She'll ruminate for 7 to 9 hours. She'll drink for about roughly half an hour, and then the rest of the time, collection yard, milking procedure, etc. But we don't realize that cows actually spend a lot of time socially interacting with other cows in the herd, and most of this tends to be aggressive behavior. So because we're confining cows into a smaller area, we see an increase in aggressive behavior. So if confining cows, from this table shows like cow space going from 5,500 square meters to 12 to 6 square meters per cow space. Then the amount of aggression displays per hour between cows exponentially increases. So because we're placing cows in an environment where we're putting them closer together, they will show more social interaction and more aggression. Now, why is this important for lameness? Well, one of the issues is like smaller cows and ones that are lower on the social scale will be displaced, especially from primo areas like stalls and also the feed alley itself. And they'll spend more time either standing on cement or walking on cement because of their low rank. So if you look at this, like higher ranking cows, so bigger cows, boss cows if you like, will spend about 25% less time walking or standing on cement than lower ranking cows. So in terms of where aggression occurs, most of it is going to occur either on the stalls, but more importantly, it's going to occur at the feed bunk itself. So the design and the management of the feed bunk area has a significant effect on cows' behavior and therefore aggression. So the biggest effect you can have with your feed barrier design or your bunk space is improving the lot of those smaller heifers or low-ranking cows. So if you have a look at this slide, there are 4 cows in this one feed space between holes. You can see the cow that's in the middle there, how much of that feed bunk she's able to monopolize. She's squeezing the smaller cows towards the end and keeping way over half that feed area to herself. So that's the type of aggression that will displace animals, cause animals to twist and move where they can't necessarily see where they're placing their feet, and also increase the amount of time they'd have to stand on cement, which is a huge risk for lameness. So the feed barrier design affects the time budget of the cow, and increasing the feed space from say, half a meter to 1 meter reduced the aggression at the feed face by about 50%. You can also increase the feeding activity by doing that, by having a longer feed space. And the strongest effect, you're not going to see this effect on your large cows or your boss cows. This effect really improves a lot of the low-ranking and the heifers. So you see fewer displacements, you see less traumatic damage to the feet, and you'll see less time standing on cement and probably maybe an increase in lying time as well. So physical barriers that reduce aggression are more beneficial during feeding. So barns that have put headlocks in rather than an open feed barrier there, that helps subordinate cows because boss animals can't monopolize a large area of the feed face. And also you get fewer displacements because these boss cows can't like dominate essentially. And that could alleviate if you have a higher stocking density, like a smaller feed face than is necessary. Putting in headlocks might actually help you there. So, I mean, the concept we have right now that, you know, a lot of our efforts are concentrated on prevention of lameness.
Again, Wald, but you know what, you just started to break up a little bit again, so I'm not sure
Okay.
if you changed anything,
Right.
but you've been really good up until now.
Okay, is that better? I hope so. So a lot of efforts are concentrated on prevention so far. One issue is once you get hoof horn damage, it tends to show up in each subsequent lactation. So many producers are sort of concentrating on, you know, prevention rather than cure. So a number of trigger factors, like concentrating on the biggest risk factors in your herd and then controlling cow comfort will hopefully prevent the animal getting lame in the first place. But after she does become lame, that's when the real serious decisions have to occur. And whether you're going for hoof trimming, dietary changes, improving comfort, foot bathing, determines whether she stays lame. So manage your decisions in terms of like prevention and how much input producers want to put in there, and also managing decisions after cows become lame have huge impacts on the level of lameness in your herd. And I'll probably stop it there and take questions, if that's okay.
Yes. Okay, I just have one question for you, Rob.
Sure.
How often do you recommend locomotion scoring your herds?
It would be good to do it sort of at least quarterly, and hopefully by the same person as well. The vets, I mean, if you could do it every herd health, that would be great. But I mean, if you can do it quarterly, that's the real help. And you don't need to do every animal in the herd, but a random selection as well. So if you do maybe 20% of the herd, that would be pretty useful information.
Sorry, Rob, could I just get you to repeat that? We did lose you a little bit in the middle.
I was saying, yeah, if you could do this, it'd be good if you get someone independent to do this. Like a regular vet visit is a good idea, but if you could do it maybe quarterly would be a good thing for, and not having to do every single animal in the herd, but do a good cross section, maybe with 20% animals.
Okay, and that was 20%. Sorry, Rob. Did you say?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that was all the questions that we got. We did have a few people who joined late, so for them this webinar is recorded and you will receive a link so you can listen back to the full session. So with that, I will just say thank you, Rob, for the great presentation. There was lots of great information, and I'm sure our attendees learned lots, and we'll have lots of people who listen back again. And before everybody goes, I just have a little bit more information to share with them. So this was our last Stock Talk for the season, and we will start up again in September. I hope you enjoyed this session and the other sessions if you managed to join in on them. So as always, for information on our webinars and any of our upcoming events, you can check out our website, manitoba.ca/agriculture. You can follow us on Twitter. You will receive a link to this recorded webinar, but you can also watch it on our YouTube channel. And like I said, our Stock Talks are going to start up again in September. If you have any presentation topic suggestions or speakers you would like to see next year, please let me know. You can email me at kathleen.walsh@gov.mb.ca, and we'd be happy to cover those topics. That's all for today. Thank you.